Bruselas, Bélgica.
Teun Voeten es un fotoperiodista y antropólogo holandés reconocido por su trabajo en zonas de conflicto. Ha documentado guerras en Bosnia, Sierra Leona, Afganistán o Colombia, así como la violencia vinculada al narcotráfico en México. Sobre este tema ha escrito los libros Narcoestado, Narcoviolencia en México y La violencia del narcotráfico en México, un nuevo tipo de guerra, el capitalismo depredador y la lógica de la crueldad. Voeten también ha investigado y escrito sobre el tráfico de drogas en Holanda, Bélgica y en general en Europa. Hablamos con él en Bruselas sobre las diferencias y similitudes entre el narcotráfico en Europa y México. Muchas gracias por aceptar mi invitación para esta entrevista. Mi primera pregunta es la siguiente. Reportes de la Agencia de la Unión Europea sobre Drogas advierten que el tráfico de drogas es ya una amenaza importante para Europa. La violencia está también en aumento. Tiroteos y asesinatos de pandillas tienen pasmadas a las fuerzas de policía en Bruselas, Marsella, Colonia, en Alemania, Estocolmo, en Suecia, etc. ¿Está Europa siguiendo el mismo camino que México? ¿O es un fenómeno distinto?
Well, it's a very complicated question. First of all, you are absolutely right. Drug-related violence is absolutely on the rise. We have seen shootings in Marseille, here in Brussels. In Sweden, whole neighborhoods are terrorized by gangs. We have not seen this before. This is a new phenomenon. It only started like 10 years ago. We also have in Holland this new phenomenon of sicarios. Of course, in 1990 I had already sicarios in Colombia, Medellin. I was there at that time in Medellin to do a story about sicarios. But you have people carrying out killings from Dutch Mokro Mafia, even in Spain. So on the whole, drug-related violence is absolutely on the rise in Europe. So it's a very worrying development. And governments and supranational agencies like the EUDA, I was at a conference like a year ago in Brussels. They, for the right reasons, they are very worried. Some phenomena are parallel with Mexico. And I always say international drug-related crime has a universal logic. It's not like that the Mexicans are crazy and the Europeans are more sophisticated. No, every criminal follows a criminal logic. And every criminal uses violence in a very selective way to intimidate enemies, to piss off territory, as a sign of communication. Extreme violence is often used as a communication tool, basically to say this is our territory and we are the most ruthless gang, so don't fuck with us. There was a beheading in the Netherlands, and actually a few weeks ago there was a dead body was hanged from a traffic sign outside Brussels. So these are typical Mexican tactics. And people are being tortured, and their torture videos are put online. So these are absolutely Mexican strategies. But of course, we come from a different country. I would say the drug-related violence in Mexico is much more ingrained, embedded in society there for a couple of reasons. First of all, Mexico has a very special geographical position. It's between the biggest coke-producing countries in South America, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and between the biggest cocaine-consuming country in the north, North Americano, in Canada. So it's logic that you have there a huge drug economy. And Mexicans being very hard-working business people, of course their drug business diversified into crystal meth and currently into fentanyl. So Mexico has a very geographical good position. The countryside, which is very remote, where you can do whatever you want, where there's no federal authority in control. But also Mexico, and I'm sorry to say, has a bit of a history of corruption and impunity, where in Europe we are still a tiny bit, only a tiny bit more civilized. And I don't want to brag ourselves, because we in Holland we have a tradition of nepotism and corruption as well. The huge economic inequality which we have is present in Mexico. I mean, in Mexico you have real poverty. I've been in the barrios of Juarez, Culiacan, Mexico City, and there you really see poverty. But unfortunately, and that's also one of the reasons, one of the explanations, we will have much more drug trafficking and violence in Europe. The economic differences are growing enormously in Europe. The lower class is growing, and of course the narco business, they smell opportunities. You have the upper class, and these are the big bosses. They import the cocaine, and they most of them are not in Europe. They are leading a safe life in Dubai, although Dubai is extraditing a lot of them back to Belgium. Some of them are fleeing to
Istanbul.
Istanbul. Some of them are actually fleeing to Morocco if they have Moroccan nationality, because Morocco will never extradite a Moroccan national. But the big bosses, they are actually the big scumbags. They live from this deadly business, and contrary to Mexican drug lords, they did nothing back for society. I mean, El Chapo was of course a horrible criminal, but he gave something back to society. And like old school capos, the same for Pablo Escobar, he gave something back to society. They built roads, they built infrastructure. But these new style narco drug lords, especially the Mokro mafia, they don't give anything back to society. And they just live a life of utter decadence and hedonism.
Dr. Voeten, las autoridades europeas están rebasadas y se quejan de que no tienen los recursos necesarios para luchar contra el narcotráfico. Lo dicen, a veces reconocen incluso públicamente esta situación. ¿Está de acuerdo que esta es una cuestión de recursos y presupuestos, o también de un fracaso de la estrategia?
It's very difficult to combat organized crime for a couple of reasons. First of all, you must understand crime is very flexible. For instance, there is a new development in drug trafficking. It takes the authorities months, sometimes even years, to realize that there is a new development. And because they need to study, they need to send out researchers, they need to wait for the report, so it will take months. And then they have to make a decision from seeing the transformation of the drug business. We need to do another strategy. And then design a strategy, implement a strategy. It takes years and years and years. Whereas organized crime, if the government comes to the countermeasure, from now on we will scan all use this control to scan all the containers on the ship. The drug related business, narco mafia, they will, the same day they will come up with a new strategy. You just cannot arrest a big capo and torture him into doing confessions. You just cannot do that. If you make secret recordings without the right permission, you cannot use it in the lawsuits. So basically they are completely protected by laws, and I think they are actually overprotected by privacy laws. And then you have a lot of organizations, and this is really very hard. I mean, if you work in crime and you screw up, you make mistakes, in the worst case you will get killed by the boss. In a good case you will get scolded and you will get punished one way or another, but the boss makes very certain from, listen, you made mistakes and we cannot accept this. If you do it one more time, you're out. Whereas if you work in government, you can fail, you can come up with miserable results, and you'll still keep the job. And I'm basically doing sometimes some research for city governments in the Netherlands and Belgium, and I'm amazed with the level of bureaucracy, by people shifting responsibility, by people not coordinating themselves, whereas basically organized criminal network is a very organic, functioning organism which really works. It's self-correcting immediately. It's an unequal struggle. I'm one of the few voices in Holland who is very much against the consumption of drugs. And together with the mayor of Antwerp, Bart de Wever, who's now Prime Minister of Belgium, we have always campaigned and said, and with me a few other, but very few criminologists will admit to this. They say every consumer has a responsibility, and every consumer finances a narco-terrorist complex.
Network.
Network, yeah. And basically you have two kinds of consumers. You have the consumers on the lower end, the homeless, the illegal migrants, and basically I don't really blame them because they have nothing to lose, but I blame a very hedonistic upper class who really think it's cool to do cocaine, who live a very hedonist lifestyle, who refuse to think about results. And I wrote a lot of articles against legalization. Upper class can somehow handle doing coke in the weekends, except that they become extremely annoying and megalomaniac narcissistic people, because as we all know, there are scientific studies, cocaine is funest for, you will develop eventually a narcissistic personality disorder, but they won't lose their job, they won't die. It's like the underclass who get addicted, who die on the streets. I'm currently, the last 3, 4, 5 years, I've been writing books on the crystal meth problem globally, especially in Mexico, US. And currently I'm doing the fentanyl problem in the US. And it basically, hundreds of thousands of people die because of the greed of a narco-terrorist complex. And luckily we don't have fentanyl and crystal meth here in Europe. We have a different historical background, but crack addiction is also ravaging a whole population. And I'm not saying if you stop consumption, the drug problem will disappear, but it's part of the problem. And again, people say, oh, everybody uses drugs. And yes, I agree, everybody needs once in a while to escape a little bit. And people say, oh, people have been using drugs for all of the time in history. It's simply not true. In Colombia they use coca leaves, they chewed a little bit of opium in the Middle East, they chewed a little bit of khat in Somalia, a little bit of marijuana in Morocco, but the way that the drug industry has become a multi-billion narco-capitalist industry is a completely new development. And the drug industry is pushing drugs. The people using heroin in the United States, they never asked for fentanyl because they were happy with the heroin. Heroin is actually, if you do 2 shots a day, you're happy. The fentanyl, you need every hour a new shot. Yeah. So it's incredibly destructive. And the fentanyl was deliberately introduced on the US drug market to create a new class of dependent consumers. So basically the narco-industrial business is hideous capitalist industry. And I always wonder why so-called progressive people think that doing drugs is okay, but they fail to understand the capitalist, insidious, predatory capitalist character of the drug industry.
Sobre el consumo de drogas y su tolerancia en Europa, algo de lo que usted estaba hablando, en Holanda hay mafias muy poderosas y también un mercado de consumo de drogas muy desarrollado. En la prensa europea podemos escuchar y leer recurrentemente que Holanda se ha convertido en un narcoestado. ¿Está usted de acuerdo que se aplique este concepto al caso de Holanda?
Well, it's a very good question. Actually, I wrote a lot of articles in which I explained why Holland is like Mexico, a narco state. Another kind of narco state, a narco state light. In my opinion, people think of as a narco state as like a crazy collapsed society, a failed society where everybody is running around with the AK and shooting each other. This is also not the case in Mexico. Mexico is an incredibly developed country, has a great infrastructure. So Mexico is not a dysfunctional state, but it's a narco state because, and I think a narco state is characterized by, first of all, most important, a huge narco economy. Second, by high levels of impunity, high levels of violence, and high levels of infiltration. And then again, levels of infiltration. Mexico is really out of control at low level, but also at state and government level. Violence, of course, completely out of control. Infiltration, the same. But in Holland, we have like the violence is not as bad, but we have shootings, we have lawyer, we have people killed.
Some executions.
Executions, yeah. Indiscriminate violence. We have narcomantas, they did very violent videos of people torturing each other. We have high levels of corruption, especially the real estate sector is completely working with
the mafias, with the micro mafia.
Yeah, mayors have been threatening, and again, it's not at the same level as in Mexico, but then the level of impunity, for some strange reason, the level of impunity is just as big in Holland as is in Mexico, but for other reasons. In Holland we have like an overload of cases, and also the criminals are very well protected by a very good legal system. And in the effect is, if you look at people apprehended for drug crime and people eventually receiving a punishment, a sentence in jail, it's like in Netherlands, it's like a 1.5%, which is the same as the level of impunity in Mexico. We are the biggest importer of cocaine, not we, the Netherlands. The biggest importer of cocaine, and sometimes they use the port of Antwerp or Hamburg, but Holland is the biggest distribution center of cocaine. It's a big consumption center of drugs. It's twice as big as in Belgium, and it's completely out of bounds. Holland has also enormous drug industry. It's the biggest producer of ecstasy.
Waar een klein land groot in kan zijn. Nederland blijkt de onbetwiste marktleider te zijn in de export van ecstasy en speed.
And this was due to some strange historical reason. Ecstasy was forbidden, outlawed, banned all over the world, except for 2 years in Holland. And in the 2 years, in the time slot of 2 years, Holland developed the most sophisticated ecstasy industry. And later on, these ecstasy people switched to crystal meth because they could make. Holland is right now the biggest crystal meth producing country in the Netherlands. They produce a host of other drugs, 3-MMC, Flakka, or they import it. And it's only since half a year that the government has cut down on websites selling all the synthetic drugs. And again, there was a very strong drug lobby and also like completely progressive drug professors in Amsterdam and criminologists. Oh no, if we should not make these drugs illegal because we push them in the underground. But the result was people could just buy Flakka, 3-MMC, ketamine online. And since they thought it was online, they thought, well, it should be okay. But we have a huge problem of synthetic drugs. The drug economy of Holland is huge. So that's why I call Holland a functional narco state. A functional narco state with low levels of violence.
Do you think it's
¿Usted
a good
considera
idea?
que es una buena idea enviar al ejército, sacar al ejército a las calles para apoyar a la policía en el combate contra los narcotraficantes, como propone Bélgica en algunas de sus principales ciudades, como aquí en Bruselas? ¿Qué piensa? Usted conoce la experiencia mexicana, la conoce muy bien.
Well, in Mexico you have a little bit different army, you know. I met
Yes.
very brave,
I suppose.
brave people in the military in Mexico, but there are reports that the Mexican army is guilty of human rights violations. So the Mexican army is not as innocent as the Belgian or the Dutch army, you know? I would say you cannot kill a mosquito with a bazooka.
This
So
is the
you need more
image.
fine-tuned methods. But then again, in some neighborhoods where people feel very unsafe and where there are a lot of bombings and shootings, I think it makes sense to put the army on the street. And I used to live in a very bad neighborhood in Antwerp, Deurne-Noord. And this neighborhood at one point was plagued by a lot of explosions, grenades, shootings, and people driving with 100 kilometers an hour through the city. And then the government didn't deploy the army with special police forces with a special armored vehicle. And for some reason, the violence went down a little bit. So it has some effect. But it's one of the methods you should use, you know? The army can never be the solution. The solution should be first prevent consumption and then catch the people involved in drug trafficking. And then I mean people at high level, at mid level, and low level. So you have to attack the drug problem at all levels at the same time. And again, it's very important to realize you can never eradicate drug-related crime unless you live in a total dictatorship like North Korea. And even North Korea, they have drug-related crime, you know. And then you should accept that people will somehow do drugs, but maybe you should, for instance, right now the cannabis, it's getting again out of hand because there are commercial growers making very strong cannabis. And cannabis these days is very strong and dangerous, nearly becoming a hard drug. You have even synthetic cannabinoids, which are even more dangerous. But these cannabinoids, they fall in the same group of cannabis, which is called soft drugs. Okay. So you should maybe make a difference between soft use and hard use. And I actually talked to a man in Vancouver, and he sold mushrooms and LSD in a shop. A little bit crazy. But then again, doing LSD, it's a very small minority of people. Normal people, they don't do LSD. There's more upper class elite of people doing LSD. But he told me, listen, what they do, they should make coca leaves legal, so people will make tea from coca leaves in order for them to stop snorting. And they said you can make a tea from poppy seeds, which is a little bit similar to opium, but much less innocent. And he told me maybe we should make the very weak plant-based substances legal and the industrial synthetic forms illegal. And maybe that makes a little bit sense, you know?